We're joined once again by Toll Aviation CEO Colin Gunn. Gunny, thanks for joining us again, mate.
Thanks, Todd, mate. Good to be back.
It's been a while. I really enjoyed our last chat around uncrewed systems and the VBAT and Shield AI. You were talking in our last chat around the interoperability around uncrewed systems and crewed systems, how they can benefit, especially working together, interoperability, regarding a whole of government approach to security management, environmental management, border protection. In Australia, we used to have a whole of government air wing, which was run by the NCS. It was disbanded for a number of reasons. I know that you've been working on some concepts recently. I was wondering if we could talk about that today.
Yeah, Todd, absolutely. Absolutely. Look, that conversation for me started some time ago now, sort of probably 5, 6, 7 years ago. I was a little fresh out of the military, had some good ideas that I thought I could push through to success, but, we didn't quite get there. I first formally pitched a whole of government helicopter capability to the then DepSec in CASG. There was a situation in which there were, a dozen or more helicopters on standby for the Defence Force for sort of search and rescue incident response. But that's responding to accidents and incidents that might happen, at most once or twice a year, more generally sort of once every 5 to 7 years. It was a time when the special operations / light utility helicopter procurement was underway, looking at a fleet of light twins for the military to help with SF response. And it's a time at which, the federal police were struggling to get access to aviation assets. Same with a couple of the state police forces who have less funding for aviation. And a time at which, and it still would be the same, where AMPs were using a lot of rotary wing assets. And so the pitch was pretty simply, could there be a fleet not much bigger than the current fleet dedicated to defence, search and rescue that didn't just support defence, that was geographically located strategically around the country, that could absolutely do all of that defence work, could do work for the federal police, could do AMPSA work and do AMPSA work really professionally and safely, and that perhaps could be a geographically dispersed fleet that could also be used in that domestic SF role. Because, my take at the time was, if there's an incident happening somewhere that SF are going to respond to, then if they're going in by helicopter, they're going in with the nearest helicopter. My thought was there's not going to be the hours or days to deploy from wherever that helicopter fleet are located. Perhaps the concept was centrally in Sydney to somewhere within Australia to respond. And, I'm not an SF expert by any means, but I thought, if there's a fleet scattered around the country with well-trained and standardised crews, some of those could be reservists, then you could grip up all of the work for federal government agencies. You could grip up some of the states that are less well funded and provide a holistic capability and really deliver value for money from that fleet. So, transitioning from a just in case of emergency fleet to we're here to help, let's fly. And I think in such a model, the aircrew would be kept fully occupied. They'd be exercising their skill set, if not every day, then every couple of days on a job. One of the challenges with an emergency response or SAR fleet is you got to be at the top of your game. So you've got to fly regularly, particularly if you want to do sort of night vision image system winching. And so when you don't have a regular throughput of jobs, you end up just burning circles in the sky for training. And, my feeling was those training hours could be better spent, achieve a better level of professionalism and better government outcomes through a holistic fleet.
And you've run commercial fleets for a long time now here in Australia and with work offshore as well in the Sollies and Timor and elsewhere. One of the biggest things that we see is obviously governments forking out a lot of money to have platforms on standby. And like you said, the crew then only get to do certain training. What are some of the cost benefits in your mind of if you were to enact a whole of government fleet around standby versus actually having a helicopter in operation rather than training?
Yeah, they should be pretty obvious, Toddy. So if you're doing a job once every couple of years. Like for military side, the military do go to a lot of effort to look after their people and to keep them safe. So you do not see in military activities regular sort of CASEVAC requirements. There are some for sure, but it's not regular. So I would anticipate that throughout the life of the defence contracting model, that some 90+% of flight hours would be training or following activities around the country because it lacks the geographic dispersion that matches where the military are operating and exercising and doing high risk activities. So the cost benefit is, of that 90%, maybe 10% needs to be training, 80% could be delivering a government outcome at some level. And not even just in Australia, right? We're regularly helping respond to Pacific Island crises, you name it. So this fleet could not only look after Australia, but, when there's an election in the Solomons, go across and support that. When there's an earthquake somewhere, go and support that. Very topical, when there's a landslide in Papua New Guinea, go and support that. So you'd have, on-station assets ready to respond not only for Australia, but for the nearby nations.
And mate, what type of platforms, what models would you see? Are you talking about a single model of aircraft? Are you talking about various models? Where are you placing them?
Oh, look, it depends the point in time you're looking at it, right? So there is no procurement to do this. So the right aircraft will be defined by the tender that comes out and what it requires you to do. So in some senses, it makes a lot of sense from an economy of scale perspective to have one type. So if you've got one type, you've got one set of spares, one set of ground support equipment and whatnot. But then, the risk is if you have a single type supporting an enormous operation, then, there's an accident in country Y and an airworthiness directive comes out to say, all fleet grounded for the next day or 7 days or whatever it might be. So you've just got to balance, single fleet versus multi-type fleet, the risk of a global occurrence versus the economies if you're operating a single fleet and can leverage a bigger spares pool. Yeah.
Because when the NCS were running the program, they had everything from a Bell 412 through to a Super Puma. Obviously, a lot of logistics issues with multi-platform fleets, but again, a Bell 412 can't do everything a Super Puma can do, and vice versa. So.
Yeah, look, it's just horses for courses, and look, I don't have familiarity with the NSC model. I know when I first joined Toll, we had a couple of former NSC pilots flying for us in the Solomons, and there were some interesting stories. But certainly you can go too far, and if you're trying to operate a dozen different types, 2 of everything, then that's about as inefficient as you could be. But there are those prolific types right now that are the go-to for various levels. Yeah, so if you're looking at a light twin, there's 1 or 2 choices where there is sufficient footprint in the country that they would be reliably supported. If you get to sort of the civil medium definition, like the 139 is a category killer, so there's nothing yet that comes close to what it delivers. And maybe in a few years' time there'll be a competitor to 139, but it would be the medium. And the super medium size, so getting up sort of 9-ish tons, 10 tons. Again, there are a couple of competitors there, so you have to define what jobs you want it to be able to do, how far offshore you want it to be able to go, what you want it to be able to carry. But a whole of government fleet, I think, would be no more than 2 or 3 types to be able to safely deliver what was required.
Gunny, what are some of the challenges in reinstating a whole of government fleet?
Yeah, look, challenges would be, I guess, competing industry. So, that could be a massive contract and maybe, all of those agencies putting their faith not just in one type, but potentially in one operator could have a challenge. But I don't see it being a single operator model. I think it'd be relatively easy, not on a state-by-state basis, because you wouldn't want sort of 6 or 7 operators, but on a state-by-state basis, looking at who holds what of the aeromedical, the long-term aeromedical contracts, you could pretty logically decide sort of which 2, 3, 4 operators might operate that network. And, whilst some time ago it might have been difficult to harmonise how 2 different companies operate, one of the great things about our New South Wales ambulance contract is, there's a provider in the north, Hunter Rescue, and in the south, which is us. But the mandate from day one of the tender process was, whoever we pick, you shall do stuff the same. You shall have aligned ops manuals. We want to send a paramedic from Lismore to Canberra, and they should hear and see exactly the same stuff and seamlessly fit into that crew. So that model has proven, that two competitor companies can absolutely align to the extent necessary to share it amongst a few operators. And so, that challenge of, industry uproar when one operator gets the next 10 years of, government SAR, I think is not really a challenge, because ideally you'd have 2 or 3 operators sharing it. And I think, it's not unusual. Companies are pretty porous. People just move from company A to company B to company C. Things are already reasonably well aligned in terms of the sort of peer level EMS SAR operators in the country. And I think there are relationships at every level that could make a joint model work. Other challenges I see are priorities. So, if on the same day in the same location, AMSA have a job, Defence have a job, and maybe Northern Territory Police have a need, for a Darwin-based aircraft, well, you've got to decide, well, who am I serving? And so you'd need to have primacy and priorities set out to figure out how that worked. But, to be honest, it would be test and adjust on the fleet, on the locations, and on how many you had in each location. And, if really regularly there's, double and triple demand for a Darwin-based machine, well, I need to take one from here where it's not being used and put it there. So I think you might have some clashes in priorities between user agencies, but I think you can set out a system that manages that. And then you have to have the network sort of shape to support where the demand is proven. But apart from that, mate, I don't see a lot of challenges to it.
Gunny, what about more importantly, money? Who funds it?
Yeah, look, that's really, really interesting. So, I'm completely confident that for less than the money that is collectively spent on Defence SAR and AMSA work, you could run this network. So for less than what is currently spent at a few different levels of government, a few different agencies, for less than that, you could have this whole capability online. But absolutely, there appears to be this insurmountable problem of different agencies sharing money, who's funding it, and I think that would exist even at a federal level. Bring that down to a state level, how you sort out the money. Well, that's interesting, but in the end, the vast majority of the money for this comes from the taxpayer. It is one bucket of money that gets distributed. So, there must be a way, given the efficiencies that this would drive, to solve that problem. And whether that's an annual reconciliation based on actual use, whether it's population-based, I think that there'd have to be a scheme by which you could make this work.
It's funny, in the early 2000s, there was a scheme called Hawks, Helicopter Air Watch for Community Safety, which I had the fortune of being part of with your cousin brother, Colin and Gunn.
Right. And
that particular model, whilst it was developed for policing, so eye in the sky policing, there's a particular model that was taken from Canada, which proved extremely successful. If only the governments had the fortitude to have taken it on. There's a good way to disperse funding, so it's not just the taxpayer paying for it as well. So, Gunnar, you mentioned that you'd pitched the Deputy Secretary of CASG a while ago on this particular concept. How was it received?
Look, Todd, I would say the brief was well received. In fact, I was called upon to deliver it again the next hour and then again the next week. And the feedback was that from a value for money and capability perspective, an outstanding concept. But look, it didn't come to fruition. But look, that was some years ago, right? And some of the money that at that point in time I was pitching could come in was, the then SF helicopter program, which has since been cancelled altogether. There's been a lot has happened since then. Per our previous discussion, I think it remains just as valid now. But what I'd say now is it's whole of Australian government aviation. And maybe, because the dollars are less, maybe a great place to start it could be with uncrewed systems. So, smaller, Group 2, Group 3 drones being shared amongst agencies, the cost, for the service is somewhat less. Maybe a good proving ground for a shared capability could be uncrewed systems. They still cost a reasonable amount of money, so you still want them operating. You don't want them sitting on the deck just in case all day, all week, all year. So perhaps what I'd say in terms of evolution of that is an organisation like like NEMA could probably grip that up. They've got a bit of a Commonwealth mandate. They're working with all the states. They run annual high-risk weather workshops where all of the emergency service commissioners from all across the country come together. So maybe like NAFC has gripped up cooperation in aerial firefighting across the country. NEMA could grip up a fleet of uncrewed systems that they could farm out where the demand requires. So that'd be an interesting conversation. We did get the invite a few months back to go down to Canberra and to brief the Commonwealth Senate Select Committee on Disaster Resilience. And look, that was my first time in a Senate committee, and it was interesting. But for the degree that we got to talk about that as a concept of Group 3 uncrewed systems supporting disaster resilience, the feedback was all positive. So it'll be interesting to see whether we can get any traction there. But I do think that NEAM is probably an organisation that could grip that up, prove a model of being able to share and prioritise an asset, and then perhaps grow it to there for the more expensive crewed assets.
Brendan Moon's an extremely good operator. He ran Queensland Reconstruction Authority here for a number of years, and he's now in charge of NEMA. So I know he's innovative and open to a lot of suggestions. So hopefully he takes those suggestions on board as well and is able to shape the Senate too. But
look, I saw Brendan. He opened the National High-Risk Weather Workshop in Canberra last year, but I've not met him. I have had the privilege of working a little bit with Joe Buffoni, his deputy, and certainly my appreciation of Joe's perspective is that he would be supportive of such a concept should there be a venue and forum in which to facilitate.
That's great. Mate, just touching on making, especially using uncrewed systems and maintaining their flight hours, so to speak. What about another concept of, there's a lot of critical infrastructure here, power lines, pipelines, other infrastructure that is, whilst they're operated by commercial providers, there's critical infrastructure there that needs to be monitored regularly using uncrewed systems, much more environmentally friendly, safer than using, rotary for those particular types of things like power line monitoring, pipeline monitoring. Maybe that could be a part of the play as well.
Yeah, look, I think there's already ongoing work around the country for infrastructure monitoring using uncrewed systems. I think it's a little ad hoc, managed at probably a local and state level predominantly. I think there's the ability to evolve that. I think that currently works in a remote environment where the regulator is happy that, the chances of there being a mishap are not going to result in, a member of the public being injured. But I think there's absolutely growth in that area to bring that more metro. I think we're on a journey. So this year, you will see drones operating, probably sub 10 kilogram drones in metro areas for the emergency services. So I think we'll see, as is taking off exponentially in America, you'll see drones as a first responder. You should see drones flying, metro, helping out police on the ground to give them situational awareness of what's going on. You should absolutely see a continuation of drones helping in the aeromedical rotary environment or traditionally rotary environment. So I think what will happen from a regulatory perspective is, and I don't work for CASA, but for them I think it's risk versus reward. So I think we'll see smaller uncrewed systems becoming more accepted and then building toward larger, more capable systems. I think you'll see regional moving to an acceptance of drones in metro areas. But I'd suggest that that'll start with emergency services where the reward is quite high. So, we've seen, drones delivering coffee. Well, I'd say the reward there is not so high. But that's a means to an end, in my opinion. So I've got nothing to do with, those operations that have occurred in Queensland and the ACT. But I see that as a means to the end to proving the safety of a system by delivering a 200-gram cup of coffee. What that's proving is the ability to do something more important. So, we will hopefully within New South Wales run a trial for delivering defibrillators, via drone in the not too distant future. And, if you could set up a network where you could have a defib, for example, anywhere in Metro Sydney within 2 to 3 minutes, that's going to save lives every day. So I think you'll see a proliferation and more metro presence for emergency services departments. And then I think what'll flow from that is public acceptance of seeing a drone flying. The thought 5 years ago, you see a drone flying as someone's trying to take photos or video of me. And now it's, then it progressed to probably someone's doing some aerial photography for a real estate agent. What you should see in a couple of years' time is just like when you have a helicopter fly over your roof at 3 o'clock in the morning at a couple hundred feet in bad weather, you'll go, that's probably a rescue helicopter, so that's okay. I think, when the public start seeing drones more in metro space, it'll be, well, it's obviously doing a police, fire, ambulance kind of a job, so that's okay too. And I think what'll follow after public acceptance is putting that into non-emergency service sectors, allowing, commercial operations to profit from it, doing, infrastructure development, modelling, whatever that might be.
Gunny, it's really important there that we've touched on not only rotary wing and fixed wing, but also the uncrewed systems, because I think when we're considering a whole of government approach to aviation, uncrewed systems, without a doubt, play a massive role in any particular scenario development and future solution. And you've just touched on a number of reasons why there. So delivering defibrillators for healthcare. It could also be considered, and I just asked my wife as well, or both of our wives, is having coffee delivered at 6 a.m. is also a major healthcare benefit to get through the morning. But
I think what those kind of programs lead to is, so you're taking a coffee 3 kilometres, that technology enhancement, delivery, reliability study lets us take a 1 kilo bag of blood 500 miles, right?
Exactly.
So
yep.
If you can sort of project forward to what benefits that will deliver in the goodness of time, I think, they're pretty significant.
Well, mate, let's hope this conversation keeps continuing, not only in Canberra, but elsewhere in the region. And you're definitely at the forefront and leading the thought processes around this. Gunny, thanks for joining us once again, mate. I really appreciate your insights and look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Great to be here, as always.